good afternoon, everyone. I am Megan Kwame with Ohio Transparent Telecom, and we are excited for day one of connecting Coshocton County. And we know this is something that the county has been working on for a number of years and thinking about and planning for, and arriving at this day is so exciting. We are live at Doherty Farms, which I just learned is a 6th generation. Thank you, Bill is number 5, and his son is out working, I guess. And they are in their 2nd year of being connected and using robotics here at the dairy farm. So for them to go live and increase their connection is really exciting. So we are going to have a number of speakers today. A couple of them are remote, but are joining us. Megan Bolton is in Washington, D.C. She will be starting off our talk today, reporting in on what's going on the ground in Washington and from a federal perspective with Broadband Matters. We have Matt Kaido, who represents the Foundation for Appalachian Ohio, who is one of OhioTT's partners and really facilitating policy discussions around broadband and other important Appalachian objectives. With me here, I have Kyle Yoder, who heads up all of the technical efforts, and Kyle is really responsible. We'll give him all the credit for actually getting to connections today. So Kyle will talk with us about that. Rusty is here from the county. Rusty does a number of things, but has been really working to facilitate this broadband project, and we appreciate his efforts. And then we were going to have Mayor Tom Johnson from the village of Somerset, which is in southern Perry County. Mayor Tom is really responsible for kicking off the OhioTT efforts, testing out this technology that we're going to talk about today. Unfortunately, he got tied up in a meeting, so my colleague Matt Armstead, who helped lead the Somerset project, is going to talk about that. So thank you to all of you. Thanks to the commissioners, and a special thanks to Commissioner Fisher. I know this has been a long time coming for you and something you focused a great deal of your life on so far. So Megan, why don't you introduce yourself, and we will get started talking about broadband.
Excellent. Thank you, Megan. Hello, everyone. Sorry that I'm not able to be there in person, but happy to be joining remotely. Just another function of connectivity and the opportunity that it brings to bring folks together. I'm of counsel at Ice Miller. We work very closely with OhioTT and other broadband providers on navigating the landscape of different federal broadband funding opportunities that are available and taking advantage of those. So I will sort of lay my talk out, starting out with some federal broadband funding opportunities, talk a little bit about what's happening in Ohio, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let me know if everyone can see it once I share, so I can share my my slide deck with you guys. One second.
We can see it.
Excellent. Okay, let me make it big for everyone. Perfect. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about federal broadband funding to start out. So, following the pandemic, I think it became abundantly clear that broadband connectivity is not a luxury. It's not something that's nice to have, but definitely a very important of our everyday lives. So in response, the federal government and Congress specifically passed 2 bills, the Infrastructure Innovation and Jobs Act and the American Rescue Plan Act. So in what we affectionately call IIJA, there's about $65 billion in funding. The breakdown of that is a part of it that is being administered by the National Telecom Infrastructure Association as $42.45 billion. There's also another $1 billion in middle mile funding. In addition to that, there's some money through the ACP program to provide connections to lower income homes. That's at $14.2 billion. And then we'll get into this more a little bit later, but a change in the IRS code to allow for qualified broadband projects to basically be applicable for private activity bonds. So that comes in around 600 million. Then there is the American Rescue Plan Act, or what we call ARPA. So in that bill, there's about $360 billion in funding. A part of that is the state and local fiscal recovery fund, we'll talk more about, at $350 billion, and the coronavirus capital projects fund at $10 billion rather. Some of that funding has already been outlaid, but we'll get more into that later as well. Okay, so we'll start with ARPA. So the state and local fiscal recovery fund program provides funding to states and indirectly local governments to basically fund broadband deployment projects. So there's about $245 billion, as I mentioned, and a final rule came out on January 6th. In the final rule, there have been some really important opportunities that were sort of expanded. One, for example, instead of just having availability for what we call unserved or underserved areas at 25 megabits per second, download speeds, 3 megabits per second, upload speeds, there's more flexibility in areas that can be covered. There's also a preference for locally owned broadband municipal projects. The 100-100 requirement that we're referring to just creates what we call symmetrical or future-proof service that makes sure that the funding will be used to help make sure that folks in all areas have equitable access to high-speed quality broadband. There's also a requirement to participate in the ACP program that I've previously mentioned, or ensure that there's some sort of affordable option for folks who are taking advantage of that funding. And then there's also an additional requirement to make sure there's a non-duplication of support. Some of the best practices and lessons learned, and some municipalities have put together, some presentations and have been thinking around, how can we best make sure that as we work with some of this federal funding to ensure that the dollars go to the best possible use. Some of the things that I've been hearing here in Washington is ensuring that there's transparency. So that means, thinking about just making sure that it's very clear how funding decisions are being made, how you can go about accessing that funding and ensuring that, the communities that are being served understand how the funding is being used. Another is collaboration. So just embracing community stakeholders in the public and the private sector. So, connecting with regional economic development organizations, communicating your community's ARPA objectives, and coordinating with county officials. The last one is important, and it sort of dovetails into the discussion around collaboration, is making sure that you're creating an environment that attracts investment. An important part of this infusion of funding is it's one-time funding. These are not programs that are going to be funded year over year. So the best way to figure out how to stretch those dollars is to make sure that you're attracting investment that's going to make these projects sustainable. I also mentioned the Coronavirus Capital Projects Fund. This particular program, the deadline for submissions ended in December. The states applied for this funding. There was a lot of money and a big focus on broadband infrastructure projects. They had similar requirements to the other pocket of funding that I mentioned, and also digital connectivity technology projects. This provided some additional funding to allow for the purchase and installation of equipment like laptops, Wi-Fi equipment to help people actually access the broadband infrastructure. The next bill that we'll talk about is IIJA. So there are some really, really important investments made in broadband connectivity here, $65 billion. As I mentioned, NTIA is overseeing a lot of that funding, namely the biggest program, affectionately called the B program because we love acronyms in Washington, is about $42.5 billion. That funding is set up right now in DC. We're having a round of what we call a comment period to decide how that's going to be disseminated. But that's going to be very exciting once it starts to reach communities. There's also the Enabling Middle Mile Broadband Infrastructure program at $1 billion. And essentially that helps build capacity within networks to support what we call high data streaming activities like video streaming, for example. And then there's another 2.75 billion for Digital Equity Act programs. That is something like what I had mentioned before in the Capital Projects Fund, providing additional resources for outreach, helping folks in lower income communities connect to resources, purchase laptops, Wi-Fi equipment, and other devices to access the internet. And then there's other programs, like I mentioned, the Qualified Private Activity Bond, the ACP, once again, that's focused on affordability. And then the USDA Rural Utility Service program, that provides additional $2 billion for folks, for example, like farmers who are trying to access the internet, and for co-ops and other providers that help folks in the rural areas reach broadband service. Okay, so a little bit more on the BEAD program. As I mentioned, it's going to be administered by NTIA. A part of the funding can be used for planning. It's definitely going to be a formula-based funding. That's a part of the conversation that's happening now in DC, trying to figure out what aspects NTIA should be looking at as they start to put together those the formula to dole out that funding to different states. States and territories obviously will submit project proposals based on the planning efforts that are funded through the program. A little bit about sort of the parameters that Congress set around how the funding will be doled out. They definitely looked at a tech neutral focus. In other words, while understanding that there is a myriad of different technology that can reach different communities. For example, fiber is not necessarily going to reach every home. OhioTT and others are providing very, very robust, high quality service using massive MIMO and other 5G technology, so that this program supports that. And it also has the 120 down, 20 up megabits per second requirement. As I mentioned, that's there's the $1 billion for the middle mile program. Essentially, that provides additional bandwidth. We talked about that a little bit, so we won't belabor that one. And then the private activity bonds. This one in particular is one that Miller, we have definitely been focusing on. And we definitely think it's a great tool that can be unlocked in a lot of different municipalities trying to develop broadband networks. Essentially, private activity bonds opens up a market for, opens up tax exempt capital markets. Essentially, private activity bonds is an exemption for tax requirements for that are normally only allowed for public bonds. So this definitely opens up more opportunity for communities to access funding for broadband projects. Okay, we got a little bit into ACP. This program at the FCC provides a discount for subscribers on their broadband bills. So up to $30 per month, and in certain rural and tribal households, $75 per month. This is definitely going to be a game changer as more people access the internet, and the FCC is already underway administering that program. Okay, so once again, more talk about affordability programs. This is just, this slide sort of breaks down the additional funding at the state level and also the competitive grant program that can be distributed to other groups outside of states and municipalities. So a little bit about Broadband Ohio and the recent funding that was funding and grants that were dispersed. Back in 2019, the state of Ohio released a strategy. Essentially, they were seeking to serve the underserved, making sure that whatever grant dollars went out, made sure that they go to the communities that needed the most. They wanted to also spur private sector investment. That they talked a little bit about, ensuring that, these projects are sustainable. So that was another goal. Achieving measurable results. Once again, making sure that dollars were stretched and spent the best. And also making sure that there was a tech neutral approach, or definitely keeping an open mind in terms of the different topographies and geographies, and making sure that there was solutions for different communities. Okay, so this also goes into, in 2021, the House bill was created. It essentially drew on the broadband strategy. So just talks a little bit about, making sure you're prioritizing unserved households, closing the gap between servicer needs, and making sure there was flexibility on the tech side. And then in November, there was an announcement, and the awards were actually made most recently on March 18th. There was more than $232 million in grant funding awarded. 33 broadband expansion projects received funds, and 31 counties and more than 43,000 Ohio households are impacted. So, we talked a little bit about the funding that's available at the federal and state level, but the most important question is, how can communities put this funding to use, right? I think obviously incentivizing construction, acquisition, and leasing of facilities for broadband is important. I've stressed that throughout the discussion. When these initial funding opportunities are laid out, these are one-time funding opportunities. So incentivizing future growth and build out and maintenance of broadband networks is critically important. Creating, connectivity for businesses, farms, ranches, as Megan pointed out, a lot of the sort of next generation farming equipment relies on broadband. So it's definitely important to consider all the stakeholders that can benefit. Building out middle mile broadband infrastructure is also important. There are going to be increased needs as more subscribers come onto networks. So focusing on making sure that there's enough capacity is important. And then, public Wi-Fi projects. A number of these programs provide funding for Wi-Fi projects that can help expand the reach of broadband infrastructure, so in public places, so that students and other folks in the community can access broadband connections. And then also thinking about expanding and doing outreach to the low income community to make sure that low income customers can get connected. Last, attracting private partners is important. We talked about this a couple of times. And the way to do that, there's a couple of different ways to think about that. Effectively managing local rights of way, seeking opportunities to reduce build-out costs is important, and also alleviating permitting delays. And that sort of concludes my portion of the program. If you all would like to reach me or have any questions, I'm definitely happy to take questions via email, and looking forward to the rest of the discussion.
Thank you, Megan. Really appreciate it. And I think you point out something that's so important. We think about broadband and we're all focused on solving that problem, but we've talked a lot about Coshocton County over the past months about this really being more of an economic development project, right? So looking at all of the different funding sources that are available and figuring out for each community what works best to get there the quickest, and really with a focus on reaching those unserved and underserved communities. So thank you for that update. We really appreciate it. And it sounds like things are ever changing coming out of Washington as well. So I expect we'll see more on that. We'll turn it over now to Matt Kaido. Matt comes to us, as I said, from the Foundation for Appalachian Ohio. While FAO really seeks to represent first and foremost Ohio's 32 Appalachian counties, they have really stood out over time as a leader for Rural Ohio Matters. And so, Matt, I wondered if you would address, what are you seeing out there in rural Ohio? You are on the ground every day in your position, talking with folks, thinking about broadband. What are you hearing? And tell us what's happening out there.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. My name is Matt Kaido with the Foundation for Appalachian Ohio. We are a regional foundation serving the 32 counties of Appalachian Ohio. Our main mission is to improve the quality of life for the citizens of Appalachian Ohio. Particular to connection, we really saw the problem exacerbated during the pandemic. We were quick to form a program to facilitate hotspot lending programs to schools and public libraries in the region. So at least during that moment where everything went digital, including kids' education, people's jobs, that people could have a connection. But we knew that those solutions were temporary, and that we were really in need of a much stronger technology, a much more durable solution to connect Appalachian Ohioans. We also provided funding to Buckeye Hills Regional Council and Connecting Appalachia, which is a nonprofit that's been working to better map the unserved and underserved counties in Appalachia. I know there's been a lot of criticism in the past of how accurately connection speeds and access have been mapped in Ohio, particularly in rural Ohio, and connectingappalachia.org is a tremendous resource for anyone doing advocacy in the region. Buckeye Hills, Omega, any of the local development districts are tremendous resources for local governments. In particular to our mission, internet connection is now so vital to quality of life, education, the opportunities with telehealth, job searches, economic development, site selection. And we're seeing so many businesses coming to Ohio now, huge companies and the suppliers that are going to come with those investments. And Appalachian Ohio can be a very attractive place to locate a business with increased internet access. So the amount of economic and social development that can happen is really astronomical. And it's going to really help existing businesses in Appalachia thrive, like we're seeing today at the dairy farm. Ohio Southeast is a great economic development organization that can help with site development or any sort of business expansion, job retention in the region. So I'd encourage anyone to reach out to them. But it's definitely an exciting time with so much state, federal funding for broadband, and there's so much policy attention. But unfortunately, it's not a wave of a wand. Some of these solutions are going to take years with a lot of programs, and the speed of deployment is still critical. It's exciting that some of these opportunities are there, but people need connected quickly, and they also need affordable solutions. And that's why I think OhioTT is such a nimble solution for both of those fronts. And it's just great to see Coshocton County and the Village of Somerset, take initiative for their citizens. So that's all I have. I'll kick it back to you, Megan.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And so we'll bring it back here to Coshocton County. And when we started this project, what we heard from the commissioners, and I hope Matt at the end of the table will correct me if my math is wrong, but I think we talked about within the county over 9,000 households, correct, Matt, that are unserved or underserved at this point. And so there was a real focus on connecting these families, these businesses that needed help. We're sitting in one today, right, Bill? As I said, Bill and his family here at Doherty Farms just went live with their robotics program 2 years ago. Is that correct? March, 2 years ago. And so having connection and having stable connection is really important to businesses like this. And so when we were brought in to look at a path to connection, it mattered that it happened quickly, right? So you look around rural Ohio, and so many people, and those of us that live in rural Ohio, have been waiting and waiting for connection, and people are tired of waiting. They're now working from home, realizing they need that connection today. My colleague Kyle, who actually goes out and works on installations at people's houses, are begging him, saying, hey, to keep my job and live here, I've got to get connected. So we looked at what technology is available. And Matt, I'll have you talk a little bit in a minute about how we got started at OhioTT. What was that real call? And we started with a pilot in Somerset. And then Kyle, I'd love for you to address the technology, right? So I think most of us, including myself, thought, well, I'm either going to have fiber running past my house, or I'm probably going to have nothing, or maybe some fixed wireless solution I tried, but it didn't work, particularly if I live in a valley, as some of us do, or I have any topography challenges. So Matt, you want to give a little introduction on where did OhioTT come from and our partnership with Coshocton? And then Kyle, let's talk about the technology.
Yeah, just like what great companies do, they look for problems to solve. And obviously, as Matt alluded to, the pandemic definitely exacerbated the problem. We were seeing people sitting in parking lots or parks trying to connect to the internet, do their homework, apply for a job, connect with their family members who are remote. We decided as a group of entrepreneurs and technology folks and people who are definitely on a mission to solve big problems, to attack that. We were able to make a great connection with Mayor Tom Johnson from the village of Somerset in Perry County. And he said, we have a problem here too. And just like when we drove out here 20 minutes away from downtown Coshocton, there's vast spaces between homes that make it very, very difficult. And I feel empathy for the broadband providers who are trying to create jobs or trying to create an economic business. But to go miles between homes with fiber makes it very difficult. And so a solution like this in our county and in Perry County here, it made a lot of sense. So in that situation, very quickly, we connected with Mayor Tom. He made some calls, got coordinated amongst the folks there in town, and very quickly provided access to a water tower. So that's the beauty of some of our technology, and the nimbleness is we're looking for vertical assets that give us reach. And in this particular case is a water tower, and we were able to put up within 30 days between meeting with Mayor Tom, getting the approvals, putting the antenna onto the tower, and radiating our services out to those residents. We were able to provide service in 30 days. And so that was a substantiation of our business that happened over last summer, right in the midst of everything being very difficult, supply chain, resources, you name it, that we went live. We've got several dozen customers there in Somerset. And to Megan's point, this being the very first tower stood up and radiating very reliable, very affordable internet service as of last night. So we're very fortunate that Kyle was able to do that. We're now on the path over the next 90 days to provide service to people, those that have unserved and underserved, which means people who cannot get 25/3 service today will have the ability to get our service within about 90 days. 5,000 households. That's a lot more residents. That's a lot more businesses. It's a lot more buildings that are going to be able to have that service. So we were very happy, giggly last night talking about this as Kyle was standing on this floor at about 9 o'clock at night, making that connection with that device over that window to the tower that's just over to the side of us. So
and Matt, could you say too, when we talk about unserved and underserved, so just to put some perspective on that, that's 10 towers. So this is the first,
That's
we're
right.
standing here getting service from the first tower, which we all call the Mill Creek Tower. And by the end of June, we will have another 9 towers up here inside the county, reaching those 5,000 unserved and underserved households. But it goes beyond that, right? So your reach will be even greater. So folks who may have had service are now going to have the great thing of choice.
Yes.
And service.
Yeah, our focus is obviously those that don't have the service today. That's our partnership with Coshocton, and the funds that were made available for this is giving that service to those that need it most. But there are a lot of people that sit in the middle of all this that may have some existing service. It may be an old DSL. It may be working off of a hotspot that wasn't accounted for, that we'll be able to provide that service to very affordably. We're recording this so that we can share this with others in the state and others that are trying to think about this as a big problem that they must solve. And we're starting at $29 and we're making lots of investments in the community, as are the counties. And I think to Megan's point on economic development and a lot of our partnerships, this public-private partnership, this is a model that we see very exciting. And the fact that our funding obviously takes some time to get things set up and contracts and everything else, but within less than 6 months, we'll be providing service to over 5,000 people who didn't have it before. And that's just unheard of in traditional senses relative to maybe some existing legacy things like fiber. So we're super proud and super happy to be here and just love the partnership.
So before we turn it over to Rusty to talk about the county, Kyle, help us understand, how does this happen and what has the evolution been? Give us a sense of timeline and where does this technology come from?
Sure. So the technology we're using is called Massive MIMO. Everyone here probably has Wi-Fi, knows what Wi-Fi is in their house. That's how the fixed wireless started back in the early 2000s, I think it was. I've been in the service business for about 20 years, and we just took that Wi-Fi router that goes in your home, we put big antennas on it, put it up on water towers, and that was how we provided service to get people off of dial-up and onto some broadband service. And it worked okay, but we had a lot of problems with the trees and the lay of the land, especially in Appalachia, Ohio. And people would get on at night and watch Netflix, and the need for more broadband came over the years, and it wasn't designed to handle all that capacity. But that was all we had. So we used it, and we put it up out here in the areas where fiber didn't make sense to run from house to house, as Matt said. In early 2020, during the pandemic, as we were all locking down, this new commercial system came out called Massive MIMO, and it addressed all the issues with the trees and the buildings and structures in the way. It used different beams to send signals out and bounce signals around instead of trying to shoot it from the tower that you had to be able to see to your house.
So that's what people call line of sight.
Line of sight, right? Yes. So maybe you had a couple of people that could see the tower, but there was 9 other houses that couldn't see the tower. They had a row of trees in the way and didn't work. Mm-hmm. This technology overcomes that issue. So was that this last summer? In Somerset, we put up demo equipment just to see if the stuff actually works, and it worked great. We were able to do it really quick. 29 days we had it up on the tower, and we were hooking up customers. So that was able to show how the service worked. We had lots of customers that would call and say, how are you transmitting? And we'd say, well, we're coming off the water tower there in Somerset. Oh, okay. We tried that already. It doesn't work. And we said, okay, this is new technology. Let's come out and see if it works. And we would hook them up, and they'd have 100 megs of service, and they would be doing backflips. They were so excited. We had homeschool students. We had 2 speech therapists, teachers that said, boy, it's really challenging to try to do speech therapy over a bad internet connection. So just lots of stories. So it was really fun for me as being in the technology world to be able to use that technology and see how well it works, but then fun to actually provide service very quickly to the people that need it out in areas.
Yeah, that's exciting. So Rusty, tell us what has been happening on the ground here in the county? What have you got? What are the challenges that you all have faced over the past several years, and how are you addressing it?
A little bit to get on the challenges to get started. There is several companies that either offering broadband or satellite or traditional Wi-Fi in the county, but nothing in the last few years that we realized that we need to work through a pandemic, as Kyle just alluded to. And honestly, during the pandemic in our community, in the commissioner's office, three of the commissioners are here today, it was probably a daily conversation there on what we were going to do to address that problem. We were getting phone calls from people working from home. We were receiving phone calls from all 3 school districts in our area, wondering what we were going to do to stay connected. So honestly, this project here, even though we've got it off the ground the last 6 months, honestly started for the county over 13 years ago, headed by Commissioner Fisher. And actually Kyle was involved in that original project too, where they started a broadband project, basically with that old technology that Kyle stated to. With that
latest and greatest,
which was the latest and greatest at the time. But the reason I bring that project up, those relationships that the county built during that original project has paid dividends in this project. I mean, between the relationships and subject matter experts, the infrastructure, we now, because of that original project, we already had relationships built with Ohio Marks for that vertical infrastructure. We already knew what vertical infrastructure the county owned that would be an asset to this. We're using water towers. So we already had a good idea what this project was going to take to get off the ground, and we'd already built those projects and relationships. So we actually not only got those relationships started, as Commissioner Fisher stated one time in the office, we were like putting the old band back together. So we even got our old RFP out from the original, looked it up, dusted it off, and kind of wrote a new RFP for this project, which when we awarded that to OTT, eventually when it went through the RFP project or process. And right now the county has allocated $5 million out of ARPA money towards this project.
And so that'll serve, when you look at that, I guess a little under half, right, Matt, getting back to the numbers of the county. Then.
Yeah. Yep, that's right.
I wrote down 9,000 households that OTT had come up with the data collected that was going to be either underserved or served with this, that were not served at all or underserved with this project, like Megan had brought up earlier.
Yeah, thank you, Rusty. I want to turn it back to Matt Kaido for a minute. So Matt, when you look at areas like Coshocton, you look at rural Ohio, what do you think the biggest challenge is? You know, we hear things like affordability, speed to deployment. You know, what is your view on, you know, what are the hurdles to overcome in implementing broadband in these areas?
I think it's speed of deployment. I mean, I really do. I mean, it's just the technology hasn't been there for the amount of people needed to be reached in a quick amount of time. So in terms of access, I do think speed of deployment is the most critical. So, and I think that's why OTT is the solution to that.
Kyle, did you have something to add?
I guess what I would add is, Matt, this is the answer to your problem. We have had this tower up and running. We're out in the middle. I wish I could show the camera around the area.
We can see Kyle's windburned face right now.
Yeah, I mean, it is.
He wasn't skiing.
We put this tower up in a week's time, and we're broadcasting today to a dairy farm in the middle of really, I mean, it's the middle of nowhere. There's robots back here feeding the cows behind us. We're talking over Zoom to you guys in perfect quality. It's pretty amazing. And this is
the true closing of the digital divide, as we spoke about this morning. You're right. You're seeing it. You've got the robots behind us. You aren't pixelated, Matt, which you often are. We can actually see your smiling face, and it's exciting to see that.
I think I just maybe add a couple of comments. And Rusty, as we were getting into this and starting to talk about the technology and where it sits, as we put new towers, we're talking about the 10 co-location, we're getting new towers in areas where reception for a mobile phone is very, very difficult, let alone getting internet service, and the ability to co-locate our existing hardware on an existing tower for other mobile carriers to gain access to that. It's a byproduct value proposition that this type of technology delivers. And the same system that we use uses the OnGo Alliance system. And so from an agricultural perspective, as you have farm equipment going up and down fields, you can radiate this technology out to those devices, to those machines, to those tractors and so forth, and do the precision type of agriculture that's required. Drone technology can connect to it, and that's not something fiber necessarily can do. It certainly could as you add equipment, but that's just inherently built into the technology that we use. So we're seeing some really interesting additional applications that are going to be being able to get taken advantage of that it wasn't even in the RFP. It's just the value that's already built into this newer technology that we're seeing.
Megan, I think most communities that are looking at this would be surprised, because I was, and I've spent pretty much my whole life here, surprised at how much vertical infrastructure is available in communities. Once you actually get out on the boots on the ground and start looking, I mean, to the point where Mr. Fisher, Mr. Conkle, Mr. Sharrock have been here their whole life too, and we just identified another tower this week that we I don't want to say we didn't know about, but it didn't come to mind. So I think that most communities that are thinking about this, they wouldn't have to build 10 new towers. The vertical infrastructure, they might have assets already that would be plug and play basically, that already have backhaul into them. So I think most communities could realize what they could do with what they already have. Some that they would already own probably too, and not have to co-locate.
Rusty, in one of our previous meetings, you and Kyle were geeking out on the technology a little bit. And once the entire infrastructure is in place, you were talking about actually like EMS having access to this type of technology and how that can help.
I almost went in the weeds on that today, but I decided not to, because we're always first responders, whether that be fire, police, or EMS, are now to the point where we have to stay connected remotely too. So I'm hoping that this technology can even lead to that, where we're out in the field. Obviously, my background is in public safety, where when we're out in the field, we're hoping that can help us be connected too. Because every car pretty much in law enforcement now has a computer in it. It's coming along where now fire trucks here locally, they're going to have tablets, and now we're using GPS to get to where, so we know where we're going. EMS is doing the same thing. Some of the reporting that we have to do is done remotely. So yeah, you're exactly right. I'm hoping that this technology eventually leads to that. And I didn't want to get completely into weeds to that today, because it's not a topic we talk about a lot. So I didn't want to put anybody on the spot what they thought that could lead to. But you're right. It could be a huge benefit in the first responder world as well.
I was going to ask you all, and you stole a little of my question, but if you look at what are the ancillary benefits of getting connected, and also you're on the ground here with the commissioners, from a business perspective, we obviously have agriculture as a big example, right, of a beneficiary of getting this technology in place. What other businesses are here in the county? How do you all look at that, and who are you hearing from?
I think every one of us, the three commissioners and Mary Beck here too, their clerk, that have been out in boots on the ground talking about this project, have been stopped by a business and saying, hey, when's this coming? We could use it. Whether that be a golf course, a winery, a tractor dealership, a farmer. I mean, it's been everywhere out in the community. If you're not in one of those areas that has a line connection, they're looking for internet, because everything they do is now, whether that be paying bills, whether that be taking customers, whether that be ordering. So yeah, every business that we've talked to that's outside of the major metropolitan of Coshocton has stopped one of us and asked us about it. So it's huge for economic development and for the business world as well. So.
Absolutely. Megan, I'm going to ask you a question here. So we talk about broadband. People want to get their communities connected and do so quickly. And I think there's been all of these funding sources, which are really exciting. But then people are also, I think all of us sitting here, even on the ARPA dollars, looking at there were guidelines, there were interim, draft, final guidelines. It's confusing to look at all of this. And so a question I have for you is, if you look at the ARPA dollars, a question I've heard over and over, I think everyone here at the table has heard, can it be used in conjunction with other programs? Are you seeing that happen? And if so, do you have an example or two of that?
Of course. So it can absolutely be used in conjunction with other funding. I don't have a particular example that comes to mind, but that's the idea. I think, if we're talking about the different iterations of rules and the conversations that we've had in DC and feedback that we've gotten from stakeholders, it's definitely been that there needs to be increased flexibility for how communities can put these dollars to work. There is not a one size fits all solution. You know, this funding, you know, even billions of dollars is sort of a down payment on, you know, truly closing the digital divide. So I think that, you know, the attitude or the sense of what I'm hearing in DC is that, you know, we are looking for communities to think creatively. You know, I think that there's been an openness and the dialogue, you know, from lawmakers both on the Hill and in the administration is trying to figure out ways to make it easier for projects to come to bear, to provide, you know, states and municipalities the flexibility to, you know, have more of a seat at the table and get more involved and a focus on, you know, having that local ownership and that buy-in for broadband connectivity has definitely been something that has consistently been said. So I think as we start to see more of these projects come down the road, I think there are going to be some additional, you know, amendments and changes, and obviously other funding opportunities that'll come from the FCC and other agencies. But you know, I think it's a step in the right direction. But I think that the attitude, at least here in DC, is, you know, to keep our eyes open for those opportunities.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. And I guess in that same vein, do you see more openness towards alternative technology solutions? So we're sitting here today talking about something many of us have not had access to before, a new technology. Are you hearing more discussion about that, both at the federal and state level? I certainly hear it on the ground here in Ohio. I was just curious on your perspective there.
Absolutely. I think, you know, the evidence is in how these very large bills were drafted. There was definitely a focus on tech neutrality or tech neutral options. I've been working on broadband deployment and digital divide issues for the better part of 5 or 6 years. And I think initially there was a lot of focus on, you know, initial programs that came out of the FCC focusing on trying to, you know, focus on fiber to the home and fiber networks, but that only goes so far because we've spent millions and millions of dollars and there's still communities that aren't connected. So I think it's finally come to bear where, you know, the folks in DC have heard enough from the stakeholders in these communities who are on the ground. And I definitely think in the future, there's going to be even more opportunities for more different technology options.
That's very good. Thank you, Megan. Appreciate it. And so, Rusty, I'll go back to you on that. So we look at all these options. I think Coshocton County, we can all say, really stands out as being, you know, ahead of the game here, right? So you all made a decision while all these other sources were available to get this going. So how did that work? How did you all approach it, and how did you?
Yeah, the commissioners were, as soon as the ARPA money could become available, it was a no-brainer in our office. Just from past experience, and it was one of the original initiatives that the government said we could use the money for. So that became a no-brainer. And within a couple of weeks, we probably got the ball rolling and got it moving. And now, you know, we're hoping that honestly, Bill, I was a little bit nervous when I approached you a month ago because this is uncharted waters for this technology. So I've been bugging Kyle like crazy. Hey, what kind of where we're getting good speeds out there, because we just didn't know. So I was very, very pleased to talk to Kyle knowing that this worked out, because I think we scheduled this maybe a month or two ago. So yeah, I'm happy about that it absolutely come to fruition and worked out the way it has so far. And I know the commissioners are pleased as well. So.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I hope for those that are viewing this and listening, I think this is about sharing stories. And in Ohio, when you look at local government, that's what we've done very well. I think, Matt Kaido, you would say that as we come together and put groups together and figure it out, as Matt, you talked about. So I know we're nearing the end of our discussion today, and certainly I'm happy to answer questions as well, but thought we might go around the room of those of you that are speaking and talk to us about, you know, the next 5 years. What do you see when you think about broadband? What are the challenges? Where do you see this heading? And what is your vision for that?
Me start?
Yeah,
okay. I love this question.
Well, he was going to take that. I was going to throw it down to Matt.
You just went like that.
Broadband.
You really lack excitement on this.
Oh.
Next time we talk, I hope you will agree with us.
Yeah, broadband is, the pandemic unfortunately showed a need for how much we really need broadband. And it's opened a lot of doors to, a lot of people like my parents, they didn't even know what Zoom was a couple of years ago. Now everybody knows what Zoom is and how we can use it. Broadband will continue to increase over time, especially the need as more people stream video and do other things, but it's starting to plateau in the amount of speed necessary. A gig is not necessary. A gig is nice to have if you're maybe a gamer or something, you want to download a game, but
Talk to us about Netflix or something.
Yeah,
What is it?
yeah.
What
I mean,
what does it take?
Netflix doesn't use more than a meg of speed in general. Per, if you got 3 or 4 TV streaming, yeah, you're going to use 5 or 10 megs, but it does not use it as much as you'd think. And it's not a constant speed. So you don't need hundreds of megs or thousands of megs of service to have really good quality internet. You need 100 megs, you need 50 megs, you need 25 megs. That will do the job. And in the future, you might need 300 megs in 10 years. So I'm saying that because I have a point. The point is that everybody is saying fiber is the greatest thing. You got to have fiber. It is great, but it's not necessary. We can do relatively cheap, inexpensive cost of this project, $5 million to cover 9,000 homes versus fiber running, as Matt said, from house to house. There's a lot of room in between. So to me, that doesn't make sense. And it takes a while to deploy it. This can be deployed immediately, and it's relatively inexpensive, and it gives pretty good speed, and it's got a long future ahead of it. It's got a 10-year growth future ahead of it.
Well, you've got some cows behind you that are going to hold you to it. So we'll see how that goes. Rusty.
I'm hoping that, right now it seems like the government is the vehicle to get this rolling, whether it be at the county level, the national level, the state level. So I'm hoping in 5 years that the private sector can take this infrastructure that we're putting together here and build off of it and take those micro pops where there's neighborhoods that have okay service. And we as a neighborhood can get together and say, hey, let's beam off that infrastructure that the government put up, but let's make it our own, put our own little tower up and have our own community here. So, the government right now is being a vehicle to get this off the ground, but I'm hoping that eventually in 5 years, we can see the private sector kind of take that infrastructure and run with it and get even more people connected to see the benefit. Use the government to show everybody the benefit of it and let the private sector take over and say, yep, let's run with it and start putting more micro pops or small towers in to get more people online.
Well, and hopefully we'll go over those percentages. So when we look at those maps that Matt Kaido, you talked about, and I'm going to throw it to you on this, what do you think? We're really putting you on the spot here. So when you look at the maps, we saw that at least if you looked at the 32 Appalachian counties that you serve, I think it was, less than 50% hit the federal minimum standard of 25.3. What do you think that looked? Do you think it changes in the next 5 years?
Yeah, I sure hope so. And we could look at data at certain speeds, but I'll kind of give an example of a friend of mine that lives in Hocking County. She's a family, daughters going to college online, and she also was doing her job virtually for that time, and they didn't have the bandwidth or the speed to be able to be online at the same time. So they literally each morning had to go on. It's like, here's when my classes are, here's when my meetings are. And they had to make tough decisions of, what parts of her lectures she could attend and which virtual meetings, this person could be either on camera or call in or not be involved at all. So that's just one example of, a relatively well-off family in a region having to make those very difficult decisions because they don't even have the access. So my hope is that in 3-4 years that families no longer face those issues and they'll be able to do the things they have to do to get their education or to keep their job.
We agree, Matt. Thank you. We'll turn it over to the other Matt, and then we'll conclude with Megan.
Yeah, I think we will be doing a massive disservice if we don't do the right thing with all these federal dollars. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity of funding at the state and federal level. And if we do not deploy this money appropriately fast enough for these individuals, we'll be doing a massive disservice. So, you know, in Coshocton County, the 9,000 people or households that don't have internet access, I want every single person to have access. That would be the ideal situation, whether that's through private investment or in collaboration with the county. I used to visit here as a kid all the time. My grandmother lived up on Highland Boulevard, up on the top of the hill, worked at the hospital downtown. My aunt and uncles are still here. I have cousins still here. And they, along with every other resident in this county, deserve to have internet access if they want it. And so we're doing our job as OhioTT to try to deliver that service in partnership with the county and anybody else who will participate with us and alongside of us. And I think in the region that Matt sits in, there's over 1 million people who do not have internet access across that region. And so some of these projects will not come fast enough. So right now I'm focused on the next 2 or 3 years. And by the time 5 years comes around, we darn well better have used these funds and put the right partnerships in place to deliver the service.
Amen. Megan, so we will conclude with you. Thanks to both you and Matt for joining us remotely today. But what do you see? What are your thoughts about the next few years?
So I think I'll sort of pull together a little bit of what everyone said, right? I think the biggest thing is I think more folks will be online and there'll be more of a demand for the folks who aren't getting connected and more pressure on state, local, federal governments to make sure we're getting these people connected. I think, you know, the COVID-19 pandemic definitely brought this issue into focus. This has been something that advocates have been talking about for years, but finally we kind of have the rubber to the road. We have a significant investment, once in a lifetime investment. And I think, you know, even for some of the municipalities that we represent here at Ice Miller, for the first time, they're sort of turning an eye to say, okay, we have some funding to really invest and bring some of these solutions to bear. Also on the mapping piece, the FCC has been tasked with improving maps. So really finding out what areas really need the most help and how to laser focus investment at the federal level on those areas, I think will also bring more people online. And you know, the technology, you know, OhioTT is a great example of finding creative solutions to connect communities. I think there'll be even more technology solutions and more cost-effective technology solutions that'll come to bear in the next 5 years. So I think that we're sort of at a turning point, I think, in the digital divide and that discussion. I think that beyond just deployment, there's also significant investment in doing the outreach to educate people about the benefits of getting online and how to reach some of the subsidies that are available. So I think there's a turning point, but as the other Matt mentioned, you know, it's really going to be up to the communities to invest to make sure that this investment does reach these communities.
Thank you, Megan. And thanks to all of you for being here today. As I said, we are excited to work with you to connect Coshocton. Thanks to the commissioners, to the community, and we look forward to working with you. So this is going to be fun.
Thank you, everybody.